I think just to start would be to, yeah, Marshall Randall. I'm a endurance junkie. So yeah, this should be a little bit like an AA meeting.
We're not endurance junkies.
Yeah, okay. So I've been fortunate because, yeah, man, from literally high school through college and to where I'm today at like 65 years old, I've just never stopped doing endurance events. You know, track and field in high school, lucky enough to continue through college, have always been involved in cycling at some level, even back then. I can remember when a neighbor dropped off a stack of Velo News, and this is like back in the 70s, and they were just really nice newspaper stock for those that can remember that. And that's what really got me hooked on cycling, just all that imagery and everything. And then in college, you know, it literally almost cost me my scholarship because I was doing some bike races as well as on the cross-country team and the track team, and I showed up for track practice one day with just scabs from one end down to the other, and it's like, yeah, make a choice. Which one are you gonna do? So continued with running, and then I would say a couple years after college and stuff, started cycling more hardcore again and had the opportunity to go with a small group to Florida and train for Olympic trials, knowing full well that, you know, yeah, was not gonna make the team. But just the chance to participate at that level was a goal in and of itself. And that really right there kind of segues into what some of this is about. And that's goal setting. And firm believer that, and I think my sales team has heard this maybe too many times. There goes one right now, laughing. Yeah, the failure for me is not to achieve a goal. The failure starts with not having a goal. And that's just kind of my personal mantra. I don't think it has to be everybody's, but that's how I go about achieving what I want to achieve. I mean, the first thing for me is once I know what I want to do, then it's like, really, what is the goal there behind that? Is it time? Is it setting the distance? Is it going for a specific, I don't know, just to finish or just to do it? All those are things that are goals. Taking a dip back, this should have advanced, but I can see it's not going to agree with me. Kind of the point of this slide was just that the endurance junkie piece. I've been fortunate enough, I did a lot of snowshoe racing, was on the US National Snowshoe Racing Team. I've done multi-day races and running. Duathlons and triathlons was a big push for me after not making it beyond the Olympic trials. It was like, okay, what's next? What's the next goal for me? Because I'd quit my job at UPS, a full-time job, just to chase that dream. What's the next one? So started competing in triathlons and duathlons and had my pro license in triathlons. So just to set up the story, I mean, I've been doing this forever. And even that picture there on the bottom, it's maybe like 15 years ago. And there's a bunch of youngsters ahead of me. And I think I was 50 years old, and that was the regional championships, and still was able to eke out a third place. So for me, that's another thing, is that age doesn't have to define, you know, what that goal is. So I'll move on with that. I think the next piece of this I would go into is what got me hooked on recumbent cycling, because, you know, I've been doing triathlons and duathlons and running events and all this stuff right up until I came to work for Wizwheelz. And I've been with Wizwheelz now, which is TerraTrike Greenspeed, for what has it been? Gosh, it's coming on almost 10 years now. And we bought Greenspeed about, it's been 3-4 years ago now. And when we bought Greenspeed, that's when the light really went off, because I still trained on all my diamond frame stuff and did diamond frame events. But when we bought Greenspeed and the Greenspeed Aero showed up on the doorstep, and having actually been over there in Australia and stuff and looking at it, I go, wow, what can I do with this? And there was a gentleman by the name of Caleb Klein. I don't know if you guys have seen any of his stuff. You know, he races on an ICE VTX. He's 29 years old, out of Las Vegas, Nevada. And he set out to set all the records on recumbent trike, the road records, from 24 hours down. And when he did that and I saw his times, I just said to myself, yeah, we've got the Greenspeed Aero. That's something that I can aspire to do, and went after it. So the goal setting piece for me, set in place. There's the goal. So then the next piece is, how do you go about achieving that goal? And for me, I use some of what I'll call periodization. You know, I set out in that one, it's set a really good endurance base. And by the way, it took about 4 months for me to get all the training in, the volume I suspected I needed in order to ride for 12 hours, to set everything from 100K, 200K, 300K, 100 mile, 200 mile, and then 6-hour and 12-hour records. So it was really just building a big, huge endurance base. And then I went into more of a power phase where I wanted to increase my watts that I could put out for a given period of time, and then back into another endurance phase, and then finish up with another power phase. All that to say, every single one of those had goals in each one of those segments that I wanted to achieve. You know, I knew what my watts needed to be to break that record. And then the next goal was I knew what my heart rate could be for about 12 hours. So how do I get those things to meet? And that's how I approach it. You know, I kind of say everything's just math. So with that, I can go back into this. That's a real quick preview of it. But since there's such a small group, I would say if anybody's got any questions and really wants to poke at that, please do.
Do you still go on diamond frames? Are you still a two-wheel person too, or not?
So here's an interesting thing with that. The answer is yes, if there's something that I'm trying to do on it. Like, quite frankly, I was going to do a, well, it's called Iceman in northern Michigan up by Traverse City. And it attracts about 5,000 racers, and it's a mountain bike race, and it's about 30 miles long. So a couple months ago, I said, well, it's time to put the diamond frame back in the trainer, get ready for that event. I do it with my son-in-law every year. Family things came up. That was erased off the calendar. So then a good friend of mine, a photographer, said, hey, I'm taking pictures for a new event. A guy's coming in from South Africa. He's got this really successful race series called the Munga, which is, in South Africa, they end up being 500 to 700 mile long races, totally unsupported. Bring your own stuff. Yeah, there's a few aid stations, but when you leave, you can accept no outside support. You're on your own. So he's brought that series to the US. He has 2 races this year. One was up in the northern part of Michigan, and it was only 170 miles, and he had to be done in 24 hours, and then he has one in Texas. So my friend calls me and says, I got a free comp entry fee if you want to do it. He doesn't have a lot of entrants, so he'd like me to just find somebody that's crazy enough to do it. And I was his first thought. I don't know if I should be inspired by that or not. And then the rules said, you know, you had to compete on 2 wheels. And I said, but I want to do it on my recumbent. So the race director was kind enough to go back into the race book, and I mean book, and rewrite that part of the rules to where a recumbent could do it. And so I decided to do this crazy event on my Greenspeed Aero, slightly modified. So that bumped me off the diamond frame and back on the trike again. So that kind of is the answer to your question is, yeah, I do when I have something coming up and it's what I want to do. But quite honestly, man, this is an interesting thing. Now, with all the training that I've done on the recumbent over the last 2 years, my output on the recumbent is actually the watts I can produce for like even an hour is better than what I can on my diamond frame. And before I started training, the big disparity was the other way. And that goes right back, I think, to the goal piece of it and the specificity that I try to apply to my training is that now I'm more efficient on the recumbent. So I spend more time on the recumbent than I do the diamond frame. Even though as a piece of history, I used to own 2 bike shops back in the 80s. I've been on the board of some brands in the industry, in the diamond frame industry. So I'm pretty steeped in all that. I still have carbon fiber frames and titanium bikes and all that stuff. But now, and not just because of this crowd, but I actually prefer my recumbent. I don't think I could, well, I can say, I know I couldn't do on a diamond frame, me personally, what I can do on a recumbent trike. I couldn't go 6 hours, 12 hours on a diamond frame, putting out the watts, and more importantly, putting out the speed that I can on the recumbent. So I've been fortunate again. I spent a lot of my life just training and racing, and my wife has worked and supported me. So even up until I was about 40 years old, I didn't really work full-time jobs. So I spent a lot of time doing that and have ridden some pretty fast times. So I think I'm pretty good at judging that, which I'd be faster on and stuff. You know, whether it's a time trial, helmet and skin suit and disc wheels and all that stuff on a pretty tricked out bike, I don't think I could do in an hour what I can do on my Aero. Did a race in Detroit this year at Waterford Racetrack and was able to average 23.5 miles an hour on just a bone stock Greenspeed Aero for an hour. And I honestly don't know if I could do that average speed for an hour on my traditional time trial bike. So yeah, I'm pretty hooked on recumbents now. Because of the way that I think I approach it, and Larry's standing back here behind the camera and stuff, and he does a lot of triathlons and does some pretty serious training and stuff too. There's a couple things that really became interesting to me, and that was the change in physiology. So my, what you would call lower quad muscles, didn't get engaged as much on the bike as they do on the recumbent. You know, you hear a lot of things about shorter cranks and the knees and that sort of stuff. And even though I still use longer cranks than a lot of people do on recumbents, I think it's partially because I've just been at this for so long that the infrastructure is already there and I just don't have those problems. But what I do have is that part of the quads were just underdeveloped for riding a recumbent. And it took literally a year before I was really, really comfortable at producing higher watts on the recumbent bike. So that's the first thing. They're literally, you can see it, my wife sees it, there's a different, totally different shape to my quads now from riding the recumbent so much than there was on the bike. But then your question about the longevity, yeah, again, there's no way I could ride a diamond frame without ever taking a break, which is what you do when you go out to set a 12-hour record. You do not take any real breaks. I mean, you might whip in and grab your food bag and then you're right back out. And so bathroom breaks and everything, sorry, they're on the trike. Well, I think a recumbent is way easier, just way easier. I mean, we at TerraTrike kind of call it, you know, the rolling lawn chair, you know, and it's the land kayak, and there's a lot of different analogies, but I just don't get beat up near as bad, you know, on the recumbent. So not so much joint stuff except for that lower back. But, you know, then the other thing too, that's a little bit of a lot. I mean, so we've all ridden diamond frame bikes before. You know, just my arms, yeah. They do not wear out like, yeah. Yeah, the numbing of the wrist. Absolutely, yeah. So that's why I'll go back and say there's no way I could do what I do on a diamond frame these days. This is kind of the progression. This is kind of, for me, kind of a neat story. I was hoping these slides would just cycle through. So this is like kind of just into the pandemic stuff, and this photographer friend that told me about this ultra race, he's our photographer, so I think we're pretty fortunate to have some great photography. And Mark and I said, well, what do we want to do? And we said, okay, so let's just go on a long gravel ride. We're all kind of avid trout fishermen, and we like the small streams of northern Michigan, as does our photographer. So we set out on a 2-day gravel ride, just trying to do 40 miles a day. And that was kind of the first adventure, if you will, just going through northern Michigan, riding the recumbents. I'm the foolish one on the right who doesn't have e-assist. Mark and the photographer decided to go e-assist, and I said, nah, guys, I can do this analog. I don't need that. But it was just super picturesque. Camped beside the Muskegon River after some trout fishing. And we just loaded up the trikes with everything. You know, the tents, the food. Then the next year, it's like, okay, so what's the next goal? What's the next trip? So we decided to ride from Ludington, Michigan, Ludington on Lake Michigan rather, all the way to Bay City and then Bay City Park on Lake Huron. So we could go shore to shore. And again, the goal was at the beginning, let's just have this be a photo shoot, let's take it easy, let's not worry about stuff. But yeah, by the time we got there, it's like, okay, so can we do it in a day? Yeah, can we do it in a day? How quick can we do it? You know we're taking an hour break for lunch. Do we have to? And so it started at 6 o'clock in the morning at Ludington, sticking our wheels in the water. And of course, again, Mark says, I'm going with e-assist. And that's really my first long ride on the Aero. And yeah, at this point, I am all in and hooked, because by this point, I've done enough rides and collected enough data, and I'm looking at the speeds and I'm looking at the watts, and I'm going, oh yeah, we can cook across this in a day. You know, hang on. And so it was on the road, and right away we're off and pushing.
And this is not trails, this is roads, right?
So this is actually kind of on a busy road. US 10 in Michigan it's a pretty main thoroughfare from the shoreline over to 31, and we rode about half that distance, so I don't know, maybe 25 miles on this. But you know, again, all my experience out there riding like this on the roads, yeah, I'm concerned. I'm really low to the ground, but I am blown away at the courtesy of cars around trikes. I think people give me, I know people give me a bigger berth when I'm on my trike than they ever do on a bike. And then from there, we broke down to literally a rails to trail that was just all aggregate. And I ride that bone stock. I don't know if you're familiar with the Greenspeed product or not, but they have these awesome, fabulous tires called Scorcher tires, 120 TPI threads per inch, super supple. For me, I think they're pretty durable. Other people like greater durability. I've never had a flat on them with an event like this. There's absolutely no tread on them. Larry's heard me talk about this before. On some of the stuff I did this weekend, I used a wider version of it, and I deflate them quite a bit, like down to 25, 30 PSI, and it's almost like the reverse traction. It's like I allow the gravel and the aggregate to push up into the tire rather than have the tire try to grip that stuff. And I never have any problems. So, and then when I'm on the road, they just ride so smooth. But you can see a pretty good, you can get a pretty good idea of the type of surface we were riding on that. So I went 22 miles on a trail really pretty much like that this weekend. And yeah, it's slower than a diamond frame. Okay. You know, if I was on a diamond frame, I'd always be looking for that area that's the perfect blend of enough. Yeah, so I'm not in the grass, but I'm getting where the ground is the firmest. And that's a challenge with a trike, because if I try to get that tire up into there, then this one's really in the weeds. And so I'm just looking, where can I put two tires the best? I forget about the other one. So when we got done, yep, I'm pooped. But right away, it's like, what's next? And that's where that Caleb Klein story kicks in. It was shortly after that, and the training starts. And part of that is when I talked about the, almost the test rides, if you will. You know, what's achievable, the watts, the heart rate, the distance. And that's kind of you talked about the sweet spot. That's kind of the sweet spot for me, is doing 60, 70-mile time trials in preparation for a 6 or 12-hour event. It's really giving me a good base data for what's achievable. What's my heart rate doing? Because what it does in the beginning is almost irrelevant. I have to get out there into the zone far enough to see what the heart rate is settling down into to really get a good idea of what are those watts further down the road. And that's literally what took me back. So in September of last year, I set all the records from 12 hours down on the road for any age group on a recumbent trike. And when I got done the next month or so, I said, not good enough, because I had to hold back on that first 6 hours so that I could get to 12. So I said, I want to go rewrite everything from 6 hours down. So I reset all my records in May, the 100K, 200K, 100-mile, and 6-hour record, because the math said, yeah, you can get there. When I got done, George, who's in there walking around, that I don't know if anybody's met him yet, he works for Wizwheelz as well. He's one of my crew. We get done and he goes, you need to do this one more time. I know you can break the 100K record. I know you can go faster. It's there in the math. It's already there. And all that to say, it's all in setting the goals and going after it and breaking it down into bite-sized pieces that help you get there. And I think part of that is determining, you know, what your goals are. Not everybody has to have the end of the day look like that. Just so that people get to it. I mean, it's not easy, but everybody can set their goal for what it doesn't have to be that extreme, I guess is what I want to say. So I wish I had pictures on there of the Munga. I just got them from my photographer. 170 miles long.
Unsupported.
Unsupported, and I made it 100 miles and called it a day. Because I spent 22 miles on that scree from like that one photo. And as you well noted, it's hard to find a place to hook up. And I was in second place going into that. Overall, the rest of the bikes were behind me. When I came out of it on the other end, yeah, there was only 2 guys behind me at that point. Everybody passed me. It was just so hard to navigate that. And I said, okay, I already knew what the next 70 miles looked like. And it was 9 o'clock at night. And so there's one out there that I'm really starting to, I would say, focus on. And that is, so right now I've got everything from the records on the road from that 100K to 12 hours. So yeah, the one that's hanging out there is everything that exists between 12 hours and 24 hours. And that's a much bigger commitment for me. And so now I can start to think about what that planning looks like and how I segment that and what that looks like. And I won't even dive into that till like probably December. But so that gives me months to ponder that, what that training is going to look like. But I would say that's the next thing that hangs out there for me, is just tackling those.
Thanks
So,
for doing this very much.
yeah, you're welcome.